Right. Madam Presiding Officer, good afternoon, and thank you for approving this motion, which stands in my name and reads, whereas there is public concern about the allegations of bid rigging and corruption within the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, and whereas the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development knew or ought to have known about these allegations of corruption, and whereas the Secretary's conduct in relation to the allegations raises questions about his suitability to conduct the affairs of the people of Tobago and hold public office, be it resolved that this House affirm a position of no confidence in the ability of the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development to continue to lead that division consistent with his oath of office. And be it further resolved that this House support the call for the Chief Secretary to act in accordance with Section 36(3) Part C of the Tobago House of Assembly Act and advise the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to revoke the appointment of the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development. Madam Presiding Officer, Robert Zoellick, former President of the World Bank, once described corruption as a cancer that steals from the poor, eats away at governance and moral fiber, and destroys trust. Madam Presiding Officer, we are here today because we were promised a different kind of politics, and the people of Tobago bought into it. As a matter of fact, Madam Presiding Officer, we were promised that allegations of corruption would be a thing of the past because the systems of governance would be so transparent that the people would be side by side with this executive. They would be able to see every contract that was awarded. They would be able to know every contractor that bid. They would be able to understand how the process was. But unfortunately, Madam Presiding Officer, in the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, such a system is non-existent. It is for this very reason I bring this motion as I stand in defense of the poor and the destitute, our single mothers, our parents, our single parents, our senior citizens, the differently abled and special need families, the unemployed youth who out there asking for jobs. We see them every week, Tuesday, asking this administration to provide jobs. Our students, as well as the thousands of right-thinking Tobagonians who have all shared with me their personal disgust and concern about the rampant corruption taking place in the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development under the stewardship of the member for Scarborough-Calder Hall, Assemblyman Trevor James. Madam Presiding Officer, while this motion of no confidence undoubtedly calls into question the suitability of Assemblyman James to continue to perform the functions of a secretary in the division, it similarly calls upon each of us, members here in this august chamber, to demonstrate to the people of Tobago that we are indeed bastions of integrity, and that for the members opposite, as declared by them, they are truly independent. And also, it also calls upon the Chief Secretary of Tobago to demonstrate to the people of Tobago that he is prepared to walk the talk. Madam Presiding Officer, you see, the very quality of integrity dictates that what one says and what one does ought to be in alignment. And therefore, not only did the Chief Secretary have each candidate of his team he now leads sign a mandate letter affirming a zero tolerance against corruption in the presence of a commissioner of affidavit. But he also reinforced this position in this very chamber when he presented the findings of the preliminary audit report. And he stated on that day in the House, scolding the members of his executive council, saying, "I want to warn all you from the onset of this presentation to admonish the team I lead to avoid corruption at all levels and to shun the presence of evil." He further went on to say, "I want to warn you that the same rules that I apply to those that this report will reveal have defrauded and significantly or attempted to defraud the government and the people of Tobago applies to all of us in this team. Please be warned." Those were the words of the Honorable Chief Secretary then. And I want to ask him today if that warning still holds true. Is he prepared today and onwards to take action when there is clear and present evidence of misbehavior in public office by senior public officers and facilitated by members of his own executive? So, Madam Presiding Officer, today the people of Tobago will get to see for themselves and once and for all whether this Chief Secretary practices what he preaches, whether he's a man of his word, and whether we can in fact trust him. Madam Presiding Officer, it was this very Chief Secretary who accused a former political opponent of corruption in a matter involving the construction of a zip line. And notwithstanding that there was no concrete evidence as to directly point to the involvement of the Secretary, the Chief Secretary cited Section 37(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly to justify his claim that a Secretary is assigned the responsibility for a division of the Assembly and is ultimately responsible for the general direction and control over that division, and he therefore maintained that the Secretary was culpable. The question one must therefore ask of the member for Palliative Vale and for me, Speyside, today is whether he still subscribes to this principle that a Secretary is ultimately responsible for adverse events in their division, and if so, whether he is therefore prepared to hold the Secretary of Infrastructure equally culpable for the series of questionable and unscrupulous activities taking place in the Division of Infrastructure, specific to the award of contracts for 4 new roads, costing the entire development allocation of the THA of over $300 million. Madam Presiding Officer, please permit me the opportunity to briefly summarize the series of activities that have led us to this point today. In and around early September, you would recall that the Chief Secretary announced to Tobagonians the construction of 4 new roads in time for the October Carnival. The political leader of the PNM via press conference initially raised concerns about the procurement process, the inflated cost of the projects, as well as the fact that every single one of the contractors handpicked was not only from Trinidad, but a specific region of Trinidad, while every Tobagonian contractor with the capacity and the experience was sidelined, left out, not picked. Subsequently, in October, I came across a letter of award issued to one of these same contractors, which revealed that it took the Division of Infrastructure less than 24 hours. I want to repeat that. It took the Division of Infrastructure less than 24 hours. Bid closed 1:30 p.m. Contractor received letter award by the next day. And on top of that, by Saturday, Sabbath morning, the contractor was busy breaking down the fence of Scarborough RC School, unknowing to my good friend, the Secretary of Education. Didn't even have a clue. That contractor was mobilized and on one of a school. No, Orlando didn't know. And this caused an outrage. So this contractor was pre-mobilized, ready. And we're talking about a contractor that is in Trinidad. But yet all his material, his trucks and everything was already in Tobago, ready to do the work. And the question we have to ask, how did he know he was going to get the work? To be mobilized, to be ready, to end up on Scarborough RC breaking down the people them fence. How? Hope you answer that. Honourable Presiding Officer, and we would also recall that subsequently the political leader of the PNM via press conference carefully detailed and outlined a series of corrupt and questionable activities that were at play in the award of these contracts, leading him to conclude that corruption, a runaway horse in the THA Infrastructure Division. Madam Presiding Officer, these matters outlined goes against the very grain of who we are as proud and honest Tobagonians. It deprives citizens of the island of an equal opportunity to access and participate in the development of this space and its economy. And it also is there are also serious infractions of the laws of Trinidad and the laws of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, these allegations are supported by hard and irrefutable documentary information, which clearly demonstrates that persons in and out of the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development colluded via a series of deliberate, careful, and unlawful actions to surreptitiously and clandestinely fix price and engage in anti-competitive behaviors designed to unfairly influence the outcome of a procurement process as to control the award of contracts to specific contractors, while at the same time creating a mirage to make the process appear to be fair and competitive on paper, when in fact the outcome was already predetermined. Madam Presiding Officer, having clearly substantiated the allegations of corruption and bid rigging in the Division of Infrastructure, one may rightfully inquire, what does the Secretary have to do with that? Why are you picking on the Secretary? And my simple response is, well, why not the Secretary? Why not the Secretary, and why leave the Secretary out when we understand that the Secretary ultimately is responsible for the direction and control of his division? And we praise the Secretary when good things happen. Of course, I'm sure members are well lined up to come and praise the Secretary here today. And I'm saying in the same breath, when nonsense happens, when corrupt activities happen, we also must hold the Secretary responsible. So, Madam Presiding Officer, you see, for corruption to prevail, there must be enabling actors willing to facilitate and participate in these corrupt activities. And therefore, I carefully will demonstrate the means and actions undertaken by this Secretary to facilitate the corrupt award of contracts to favored contractors at hyperinflated costs, defrauding the people of Tobago and mortgaging away the future of Tobago with no care for the generation of young Tobagonians to come. Act number 1. This secretary bypassed the established procurement systems of the Tobago House of Assembly. And we know in and around 2017, the Tobago House of Assembly created something called the Procurement Control Office. And this office is managed by the Chief Administrator. And this was deliberately done as to provide a buffer between the policymaker and the accounting officer. And it was also done to also give the procurement process a level of independence, independent from the politician. However, on assuming office, this secretary decided to bypass this system where the chief administrator is responsible for the recruitment of procurement officers. And what this secretary did? He didn't simply bring on a procurement officer. No. This secretary formed a close female associate and made this close female associate the head of the procurement unit, the procurement manager, even though there was already a procurement supervisor, bona fide procurement supervisor who would have gone through the recruitment process, would have gone through the necessary checks and balances, and would have, over time, got the required experience. This secretary bypassed the procurement policies of the Tobago House of Assembly and handpicked a procurement officer, manager, his friend. But more than that, he didn't stop there. He also looked at the projects, and he decided that he would sideline the establishment of the Division of Infrastructure. And he didn't do it in a legal way, and he didn't even seek MSU's approval to try to establish or change the org structure, because as you know, every division has an approved organizational structure. However, this secretary decided that he's not following that organizational structure. He went and hired his own project manager. So right away, the secretary hijacked the procurement process by taking up the two key organs of the procurement process: projects and procurement. Madam Presiding Officer, and what that in fact did was immediately take away the independence of the procurement process, because now you have involved inside of the procurement, leading the procurement, both project and procurement, two persons handpicked by the secretary. Madam Presiding Officer, it is also important to note that while the secretary would have disregarded the established organizational structure, and while he hijacked the system, he didn't stop there. Action number 2, the secretary attacked corrupt, bankrupt, and sidelined Tobago contractors with capacity and experience. And he hid behind the audits to indicate to the public of Tobago and attacked the credibility of Tobago-based contractors, labeling them as corrupt. And I want no brief for contractors. Once the evidence is so there that persons corruptly defrauded this island, they all must face the consequences without fear or favor, malice or ill will. They all, every one of them, must face the consequences. But there must be a process, and there's a dictating law that innocent until proven guilty. And as far as I understand, none of those contractors have been found to be guilty, unless you, the members of this executive, have information to the contrary. None of them have been found guilty, and therefore they have an equal right to whatever resources in Tobago. Because the hypocrisy is that while this secretary single-handedly sidelined blacklisted Tobago-based contractors, you know he was awarding contracts to a company called Namalco. Have you all ever heard of Namalco? Namalco, in this process of the roads, received 2 contracts. And I want to share with you very quickly, let me see if I find it. There's an article on Namalco. But long story short, Namalco was one of those companies named and taken to court by the government of Trinidad and Tobago for, hear what? The very things that I am accusing the Division of Infrastructure. That company was taken to court on the premise that they were involved in bid rigging. Doesn't that sound familiar, people? Doesn't that sound like the very same allegations being laid at the feet of this secretary and his division, that they would have been involved in this surreptitious, clandestine, evil action to defraud the people of Tobago by pulling together a handful of contractors and awarding contractors and awarding contracts? And you know, there's a saying, it is by no accident that Namalco ended up in this mixing, because birds of the same feather always fly high together. So it's no accident that a company with the kind of character such as Namalco would find its way in this bid rigging scandal that is happening down at the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development. Madam Presiding Officer, and you know, it's important to note this action number 2 that was taken, because this action number 2 not only dealt a blow to the contractors, but it dealt a blow to the people of Tobago. Because this secretary eloquently explained it, you know. This secretary told us when he was outside the chamber, when he was looking to get in, that when you deprive Tobagonians of opportunities, and you take those very opportunities and ship them elsewhere, what your strategic intent is in fact doing is developing an economy outside of Tobago. But yet, for some curious reason, this secretary embarked on a process to award contracts, road paving contracts, that Tobagonians can do, and somehow found a way to eliminate every Tobagonian with the capacity, every Tobagonian with the experience, and find Trinidadians. And what is curious about this, Madam Presiding Officer, the persons that he found were not persons engaged in typical road paving, not the junior Sami, not the Calus or Calco, I think the name. Not those contractors, you know. This secretary found a contractor. The contractor, you know what is the name? Innovative Roofing, a roof contractor. And of all the contracts he could have given to the roof contractor of 2 years establishment, a contractor that never even paved the driveway, of all the contracts that could have been awarded to this contractor, is the largest one, $54 million. And when when I did my comparative analysis, just one phase of this $54 million, you know what I found? I took the rates that the division was paying during the past administration, and I compared it to the very rates that was accepted by the contractor. And just imagine, something as simple, I want to read it now. Right, so B, let's go to, right, 2,500 tons, let's go to quantity rate. So we are looking at road paving, and it says to supply, place and install asphalt, mix and bitumen roadway 50 millimeters. Under the previous administration, for the very same thing, supply, place, install asphalt, mix and bitumen, they were paying $1,400. You know what this administration, under the direction of the secretary, accepted? Cotton? He accepted a bid of $2,500. That is almost double what was being paid under the previous administration. And when you look at the price difference, that is $3.5 million. That is at 500 Tobagonians who could have been working 5 days on, 5 days off. And Madam Presiding Officer, I want to go further, because when you look at what it costs, because he had challenged me. He challenged me to get a QS. Because every time I drove on the road, I am no road expert, I know no technical person, but just my layman, knowing my constituency and knowing my district. I pass in the road, some parts paved, some parts ain't paved. I said, but wait, where this $19 million coming from? I look at it, 2 culverts. Basic, like a deck pan. Nothing special about the road. You cut a little way in between Smithfield, crossing over Smithfield number 1, crossing over to Smithfield number 2. One little area. I walk up by a lady because I was so happy when I see the little piece of asphalt going up the woman hill. So when I reach halfway, asphalt done, dirt road again. So I said, let me get somebody who is an expert on these matters. So I sent them the BOQ of what was accepted. I also got someone to measure the road. And you know, to my amazement, the QS, so this contract was awarded for $19.48 million. You know what is the QS estimate? Tell us. Subtotal VAT exclusive, $6,646,646,646. VAT inclusive, $7,477,476.75. Presiding Officer, that's a difference of over $11 million. You know we could have do with $11 million. Chief Secretary, every day I hear balling you want money. But look here, Secretary over there, siphoning away with money. $11 million. These are things for us to cry, Madam Presiding Officer. Cry. Madam Presiding Officer, action number 3. You know, we were told about these roads, and they gave the impression, I don't know if he misled the Chief Secretary, but he had the Chief Secretary saying it as well, that we absolutely needed these roads because they were emergency. You know what? We had 2 carnivals. We had one in October, and we just had one in February. And we were without 2.5 of the roads. And you know what? Carnival came, Carnival went, and we're still intact. Yet, we were told that we absolutely needed those roads, and therefore they had to create a kind of procurement rush. But that was simply to facilitate a corrupt procurement process. Nothing else. Because what the facts are now showing is that we didn't really need the roads. The roads weren't really urgent. There was absolutely no emergency. Madam Presiding Officer, action number 4. This secretary has been running, hiding, dodging every attempt to get information about these roads. Madam Presiding Officer, I've searched far and wide. I've come in here, I've asked questions, I've been made to believe, let people believe like I don't know what I'm talking about, what I'm asking about, and in some respect, it tried to make me look like if I do tish. But I didn't stop. I kept digging, and I kept digging. I even utilized the freedom of information. Madam Presiding Officer, and you know what? Up to now, if this process so transparent, if this process so clear and concise, why can't I, after 3 months, get answers to these very simple questions that I've asked? What was the contract sum? What was the process? Who were the persons that evaluated the bid? You said that 45% of the requirement to qualify for the build design finance contract, you had to show financial capacity. I'm asking, well, let us see the financial capacity, because my information is the same contract you have given the $54 million contract. Up to now, you can't start the road because you don't have the money. So how did he get the contract? How? If the 45%, which is almost half the technical requirements, requires that you must have financial capacity, how does a contractor get a contract, but yet he can't start the work? Secretary, I really, really hope, and I look forward to you explaining how, because I've asked it, I've begged for it, and I still can't get it. Secretary, I've asked you, what was the process? You had the Chief Secretary again misled, and the Chief Secretary singing from your same hymn book, telling us that it involved a pool of over 40 contractors. I can't see pool, I can't see sea. No list with 40 contractors. What I received was a letter, a response that said it involved 6 contractors. I want to read quick because the time is going. It involved 3 to 6 contractors. Part A, say it involved 3 to 6. But in Part B, you list 8. Part C, you told us that Milford Road, you give it to Innovative. You told us Dutchford, you give it to California. Told us Lamy Road, you give it to Construction Services. And Road 4, Shervan, you gave it to Namalco. But you know what the Secretary didn't tell us in that? That he also gave the Dutchford Road to Namalco. He failed in his response to indicate that the contract that was given to California Stucco was first given to Namalco, and I want to go into that real quick, because what you would recognize is a letter coming from California Stucco. So, and he wrote on the 3rd of October, and he's saying to not the procurement manager, he's saying to the project director. So he writes to the project director. Don't know how project director controlling procurement, but he's writing, and he's saying, we are writing to notify you that it has come to our attention through the public domain. I want to ask anybody in here right now, which one of you knew that Namalco was awarded the contract for Dutchford? And which one of you knew that Namalco then relinquished their interest in this Dutch Fort project? Which one? Who in here knew? And tell me what was the mode, what platform you got that information from? Because as far as I know, I've searched and there is not on Facebook, not on the division website, and not on the newspapers.
Minority, you have 5 more minutes.
No problem. Not even in the division. No way. Madam Presiding Officer, so I want the Secretary to explain what was the public domain. And this is where how bid rigging occurs. Because bid rigging is when you have partners sharing up deals. So one partner is able to call the next partner and say, boy, I give up that. You go in. Clearly food for thought, Madam Presiding Officer. But I also want to, because the response I received triggered a response from a contractor, and the contractor is writing to every member. I'm sure you all received one of this letter from Kai Engineering and Construction, and he's saying that so he's basically saying to us, the second inaccuracy is to give the impression that the tender documents were obtained in a timely manner or were sincerely given. The company received one tender request 3 days before it was due to be completed and submitted. Right? The company was given woefully insufficient time to submit a tender. Therefore, as a matter of fact, no bids were submitted by the company on or before the closing date for this project. Furthermore, the company did not participate in the tender for the named project. So the company didn't participate. And the company is also saying that based on the, in fact, pre-qualification of contractors was stipulated as are required only before the award of contracts. So none of these companies that got contracts, it is important to note, were part of the pre-qualified list of contractors in Tobago. So where did you all find these contractors? How did you all get to these contractors? How did you all pre-select these contractors if they were not in the list of contractors of the Tobago House of Assembly? Madam Presiding Officer, Kai is also saying, we believe the statement by Trevor James to the Assembly Legislature gives the impression that Kai Engineering and Construction Limited was a willing and active participant in a fair and transparent tendering process. And this is untrue. Contractor is now saying through his lawyers that the process was never fair, was never transparent, and he himself didn't participate. Once again misled. And I want to put it on the record, Madam Presiding Officer, that I will be bringing a motion of privilege that this secretary deliberately misled this House for us to believe that there was a procurement process that was true. Madam Presiding Officer, and we talk about inflated costs, we talk about the misleading statements and all that. But Madam Presiding Officer, as I close, I want to remind us as well that this matter, as advised, infringes on specific portions of the law of Trinidad and Tobago, specifically Section 5.1 of the Integrity in Public Life Act and Section 4A of the Prevention of Corruption Act, Chapter 1111. And Madam Presiding Officer, it is my intention to pursue these avenues to its fullest extent. And as the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee of this August chamber, I intend to write to the Auditor General seeking their intervention in having an independent audit into the award of these contracts. Madam Presiding Officer, because the sum of a man is by his deeds, and this is the same man that also hired his brother on a board for a division for which have oversight for that very same board, that is the Spell Board. This is the same man that also put his wife on a board while he's sitting there in the Executive Council. This is the same man, I am advised, that was suspended by the Division of Settlement because he in fact awarded 3 contracts without the administrator's approval. And he had to resign in disgrace. Madam Presiding,
Minority Leader, your time has since elapsed.
I thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and I'll be back in. But allow me to please move this motion that stands in my name. I thank you.
Is there a seconder for this motion? Minority Councillor.
Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to second the motion.
Honorable members, the question proposed is, whereas there is a concern about the allegations of bid rigging and corruption within the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, and whereas the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development knew or ought to have known about these allegations of corruption, and whereas the Secretary's conduct in relation of the allegation raises questions about his suitability to conduct the affairs of the people of Tobago and hold public office. Be it resolved that this House affirm a position of no confidence in the ability of the Secretary for Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development to continue to lead that division consistent with his oath of office. And be it further resolved that this House supports the call of the Chief Secretary to act in accordance with Section 36(3)(c) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act and advise the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to revoke the appointment of the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban